It's blank, it's not on or anything.
I ran out of battery.
Where's the, oh, I see. Okay, anybody, you're free to bring up recordings, recorders and record the class. You are responsible for turning it on and off. I mean, I just don't remember, okay? I'm gonna push this, it gets a little silly after a while. So if it's your recorder, you turn it on and or off, but don't look at me, okay? So what does life mean? Every man, whether he likes it or not, must live on for eternity after his physical death. So we really need to internalize this one. This will become the main motivator for your entire existence. Okay? You were born, you were conceived, at the moment of your conception, a soul was infused into your body. That soul will never die, and ultimately it will be eternal reward or eternal punishment. There is no little, well, I just take that other option, right? I'm going to hang out and just not suffer. I may miss heaven, but no. You either will suffer or you will have the blessedness of heaven. There is no other option. And how you conduct yourself in this life determines where you're going to spend your eternity. You can't escape it. There are no other options, and I'm not having you on or pulling your leg. So, remind yourself that you have an immortal soul, and you have to do the right thing with that immortal soul. And what's the right thing?
Read the book.
This. Okay? So, there's lots of wrong things, but this is the right thing. And you're all doing the right thing by being here, because either you're on that path already and you want to learn it better and be inspired more, or you're not even on that path yet and you are here to learn about how to be on the path. You're here because you're concerned about your soul. I don't think there's anybody here that's not concerned about their soul, really, when it comes down to it. Okay. Good master, what should I do that I might receive life everlasting? It is a question we all should ask in one form or another, as did the rich young man from the gospel. For we each have an immortal soul. We are made for life everlasting, and we are able to choose good rather than evil. In the words of the Catechism, God made me to know him, to love him, and to serve him in this world, and to be happy with him forever in the next. I cannot know God without being moved to love him. I cannot love God without serving him. I cannot faithfully serve him without receiving the reward of life with him for all eternity. Hence, knowledge, especially that supernatural knowledge called faith, is essential to achieving our true eternal destiny of life with God forever. The knowledge of God and what he expects of us is, therefore, the most important thing that we can possibly claim the attention of man. In other words, you can't plead insanity. You can't plead ignorance at the end of it. You understand that. If you purposely kept yourself from investigating the things of heaven in this life, God sends everybody graces and they go, come look for me. No matter where you're born or into which culture you're born, or what city or what language, God sends you the graces to look for him. And if you constantly say, I'm not interested, then there's hell. There's no place for people who weren't too bad and simply not interested in these details of religion. There are only two options. Please keep that in front of your mind. You will either be in heaven or hell
Oh my
forever.
God, I'm sorry.
See,
I'm sorry.
now I know you got this.
714.
All right. So we will constantly be reminded of that. There are no third options when it comes to heaven and hell. I mean, people are saying purgatory. Yeah, purgatory though will be heaven eventually. It's tantamount to pointing you in that direction. Nobody goes from purgatory to hell. Okay, wouldn't that be a bummer, huh? I'm suffering to purify myself when I see that. Oops. If you're in purgatory, that there's an end to that, and you go to heaven afterwards. Okay, which brings up then, the body is but dust. The things of the world will pass away. But God and the soul are eternal. They will live forever. The soul is made for happiness with God. You've heard this joke before, but I really love it because it's a real story. I have to tell them whenever I see this, where it says the body is but dust. The preacher, this is like in the religion part of Reader's Digest. I love that. So an actual story, the preacher's there and he is saying, in the eyes of God, we are only but dust. And then there's this son, he's using the pregnant silence to get the point across to the congregation. And this little 4-year-old girl says, "Mommy, what's butt dust?" Took the wind right out of his sail. What sense is there then in treating the things of the world, wealth, ambition, comfort, as if they are more important than God and the soul? Eternal life is worth any sacrifice. For what doth it profit a man if he gain the whole world and suffer the loss of his own soul, asked our Lord. And that is a question we can never afford to forget. All right, chapter 3, the necessity of religion. So then we have the people who say, well, yeah, I want to go to heaven rather than hell, I think, but I don't believe in organized religion, okay? And at which point, they're always telling me this, and I say, well, come to our parish, we're not organized. We're disorganized religion. Just what you need. What must you do to save your soul? To save my soul, I must worship God by faith, hope, and charity. That is, I must believe in Him, I must hope in Him, and I must love Him with my whole heart. So what about religion? Well, what is religion? The word probably comes from a Latin word meaning to bind. And an ancient writer, Lactantius, said, "We are tied to God and bound to Him by the bond of piety, and it is from this that religion has received its name." Religion implies, there are these different things that when we say religion, we are implying. First of all, the recognition of a divine personality behind and producing the forces of nature, the Lord and ruler of the world, God. So it recognizes that there is a creator and everything like that, and that is God. It implies the conviction that the mysterious supernatural being has control over the lives and destinies of men, who are therefore dependent on Him. Next, the persuasion on the part of man that he can bring himself into friendly, beneficent communion with the Godhead on whom he feels he depends. And the performance of certain acts of homage meant to bring him divine help, peace, and happiness. So, in its very loose definition, if it does these things, it's a religion, let's say. From most ancient times, before there was Christianity or anything else, they had pagan religions in the loosest sense of the word that did these things. They believed that there was a God. They believed that they could please him or displease him. And they believed they depended on, sometimes they had multiple ones, though, you know. We're all very familiar with the pagan things. You know, they had a god, the sun god, the moon god, the rain god, you know, all these kinds of things. They believed in what we call a pantheon of gods. But in any sense, in any case, they fit this definition of religion in a very loose way. Okay, as applied in the in the times Anno Domini, since the coming of our Lord, religion actually applies uniquely to the true religion. But what he's trying to show is that there is a broader definition of religion that pagan people of old fit. That's a part.
Was it bad or kind of it's okay? Because St. Paul said that pagans or gods are Lucifer.
Yes, yet it says it in the Psalms too, that the gods of the Gentiles are demons. But what I mean is, though, they fit this definition of religion, even though it wasn't a true religion or necessarily a good religion. They did, because of an instinct that God has put into us, they did look for a creator. They did believe that doing things would make them get blessed by the creator, and doing other things would make them not be blessed. You know, this kind of thing. Just to say that it comes from a human instinct put there by God. So religion may be defined as the voluntary subjection of oneself to God, that is, to the free supernatural being on whom man is conscious of being dependent, of whose powerful help he feels the need, and in whom he recognizes the source of his perfection and happiness. St. Thomas Aquinas says, religion is the virtue which prompts man to render to God the worship and reverence that is his by right. Objectively, religion is the voluntary acknowledgement of man's dependence on God through acts of homage. So, as St. Thomas Aquinas defines it, it's the virtue that causes us really to give in justice to God what we owe him. Okay, so it's a virtue, it's a faculty of the soul, which, if we develop it, causes us more and more to recognize what it is that we owe to God and then to give it to him. And what do we owe to God? Petition, adoration, reparation, thanksgiving, obedience in general. For those of you who might be new to this, we mentioned a lot of these different saints, St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas. These, you know, when people talk about, oh, somebody's really intelligent, what do they think of, right? Oh, Einstein, right? Einstein was a good mathematician. It kind of stops there. That's pretty much all he was good at. He never sought after things eternal and never found them, because he was only really interested in mathematical formulas. And as far as we can tell, never gave too much care to his afterlife. And I have to ask, how intelligent is that? Not very. On the other hand, we have the likes of St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine and other great theologians that are minds that are incomparable in the history of humanity. Why? Because not only were they gifted with a brilliance beyond measure by God himself, but they used it for theology. They used it to know and learn more about God, which is the best thing you can do with your intelligence, right? I mean, you can use a hammer for a doorstop, all right, but it's better to use it for banging in nails. And that's what intelligence is like. It's a tool. The best thing you can do with it is to look after God with it. Look to him, try to understand him. You know, we talk about like St. Thomas Aquinas. He and St. Augustine are clearly the two greatest theologians in the history of Christianity. St. Thomas Aquinas used to walk around the room and there were scribes, people that would take notes for him. He would dictate 6 books at the same time on different subjects. He'd go to one and say da 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 da, and he'd go to another and say da 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 da, all in the same room, all at the same time. The volume of stuff he produced is absolutely enormous. Now, just so you know, at the end he said it was just like so much straw, everything he wrote, okay? But that's not what it means. It doesn't mean that it is straw. He was given a vision of heaven, okay? In fact, well, okay. And what he was saying is, in comparison with the reality of heaven, that this is just so much straw, because it can't really express the reality of heaven. It's very inadequate. But we can't forget that Jesus appeared to St. Thomas Aquinas and said to him, Bene scripsisti de me. Right? No. you have written well of me.
Yes.
So, he was complimented by Jesus on his theological writings, even though he made, because a lot of times people take that quote out of context and say, well, St. Thomas Aquinas says his stuff was just all straw. And it doesn't mean that it was worthless. It just means in comparison to the reality, you can't express it. But Jesus thought it was good, okay, and complimented him. Didn't compliment too many people on their writings, I have to say. In fact, I don't really know of anybody else that he complimented, aside from St. Thomas Aquinas. Anyway, he was a 13th century, 13th century theologian, and we tend to think, oh, those superstitious, barbaric 13th century type people. That was the height of human civilization, was the 13th century. Do you think now, aside from little trinkets like antibiotics and smartphones, do you think now has anything to compare with the 13th century? The greatest era that mankind has and probably ever will see. In different languages, they call it, like in French, when they want to talk about the 13th century, they say la belle époque. They don't even say 13th century. They say the beautiful era, meaning the heyday of mankind, Christianity, Christendom. So, Annie, where were we? Yes. So, religion then, as a virtue, is the one that it allows us to give to God in justice what we owe to him, which is namely everything, our obedience to ask him for things and all that stuff. The conception of a personal deity is a necessity for religion. Imagination is stirred by the recognition of the unseen world. The longing for communion with God arises from man's need for divine help. Hope is engendered by the possibility of obtaining communion with God. Joy is excited by the consciousness of friendship with God. Thankfulness is prompted by the obtaining of benefits in answer to prayer. Awe results from knowledge of God's immense power and wisdom. Fear, sorrow, and the desire for reconciliation arise from consciousness of having offended God and having deserved punishment. In other words, guilt from having a correct conscience. Love of God springs from the contemplation of his goodness and excellence. Okay. Religion implies faith or belief. Correct views concerning the existence of a personal God, divine providence and retribution, the immortality of the soul, free will, and moral responsibility are of vital importance to right religion. But in Christianity, which is a supernatural religion, these fundamental beliefs are supplemented and complemented by a larger knowledge of God and of his purposes in regard to man through divine revelation. So, just to add something to that, what he's saying, which is true, is that from the natural law, We can all know things about God, but it only goes so far, right? From looking at the created order of the universe, you can know that there is a creator. And you can deduce to a large extent, because it's actually written in our hearts, right and wrong. The Ten Commandments lay things out in a particular way, and some of them we wouldn't know just from the natural law, but some of them we would. For example, thou shalt not kill, meaning really thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not take innocent life. That's good for everybody not to do that, right? It's good for the person who would have been killed were it not illegal. It's good for society. It's good for families. I mean, what if it were okay to just kill somebody, right? You'd have families disrupted. You would have children without fathers, without mothers, whatever. It would be mayhem. You could just see that. We don't even have to convince you of that. So that's from the natural law. But there are details that we have which enhance our knowledge from the natural law, and these are the details from divine revelation. And these are things that you couldn't know from the natural law, from observance of nature. There are things like the existence, God's, ultimate revelation to us that He is three persons in one God. So one nature that is expressed totally in three distinct persons, but not three gods. That's something you never get from nature. You could try, though you might. That's not something that you can see by looking around you. You can see certain reflections of Trinity in creation that, would not necessarily lead you to know that there are three persons in one God, but that this three thing is a recurring theme in things that we see. Like, why were bipods not exactly a success, right? Why? Because a thing with two legs and that's not human would just collapse. It doesn't hold your camera up very well. But when you put something on three, it has this stability, and you see that kind of thing that God expresses in nature. So we have this benefit of divine revelation. So that would be Christianity. Christians know that God has spoken to men, telling them that they are destined for filial communion with Him through the life of grace, and that this has been brought within their reach through the incarnation and redemption of Jesus Christ. In Christianity, the things to be believed and the things to be done in order to obtain salvation are guaranteed by divine authority. So, outside of divine revelation, you can see how the pagans of old, they did a lot of stuff, but they had no guarantee that the stuff was going to work. It's like the Canaanites, sacrificed babies and things like that because they believed that it made the weather good and the sun rise and set and that kind of thing. Well, God wasn't interested in sacrificed babies to make the weather good or anything like that. They didn't have the fullness of revelation, so they were simply, they were violating the natural law, but they were also just taking pot shot. I mean, let's take something that doesn't involve sacrificing human beings. There are people who believe that if you did a particular dance, that you would help it rain or something like that. Well, those were just superstitions, but they didn't have divine revelation. Go on.
Lesser evil than today's abortion, because the doctor knows that he's doing bad. And that time they don't bring a rain or something.
Well, no, but they still had to know it was evil, because that much of the natural law was written in their heart. So they had to know that murdering a baby was wrong, even though they didn't have the commandment like we do. That they would have known was wrong. And it's like take for example, there's a very good book about the Spaniards and the conquest of the New World, and Mexico and South America and all that kind of thing. And what happens is these Spaniards land, and the Indians, they run and they hide. Like Montezuma, he ran and hid when the Spaniards came. Why? Because of guilt. He knew what he was doing was wrong. They were sacrificing tens of thousands of people. In fact, his own people were afraid because they were running out of people to sacrifice. We hear this, these mean Spaniards came over and they were looking for gold and they give chicken pox to all the poor happy little Indians who were peace-loving. These were murderous savages.
What's the name of the book?
I'm trying to think. Blood-drenched altars. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
What is it?
Blood-drenched altars.
The movie Apocalypse.
Yes.
It fixed exactly how.
In fact, who turned in Montezuma? Who gave him over to justice? His brother. Because his brother, they were next on the list. In one day, in 3 days, the dedication of the hummingbird god temple, they killed 80,000 people. The blood was running in rivers down that place. 80,000 people in 3 days for the hummingbird god. What weird idea is that? It's bad enough to sacrifice all these people, but for a hummingbird god? I'm not sure what that got me. More hummingbirds.
They're so cute.
I know, those people weren't cute at all, now were they? Yeah. So don't believe what you hear about the Spaniards and the noble savage, the Indians who were here before. They were not noble at all. It was a bloodbath. And who were they really sacrificing to? Satan. They were sacrificing all of these people to Satan. And he was whipping them up into a frenzy to get them to sacrifice to you. So, today men talk of religion without dogmas, but any thinking man must recognize that right belief is essential to religion and that right belief implies dogmas, which are specific truths. Christian dogma, you hear this very often, well, you guys have dogmas. Well, no, we have dogmas. Dogmas are just statements of what we believe. A dogma is not a bad thing. A dogma is a good thing. If you have a religion, then it should be clear what your religion believes, right? So, and the statements of that's what dogma is. All right, we'll take up the collection to air conditioners. Christian dogmas are not intellectual puzzles. They have the practical purpose of enlightening man on the whole range of his religious and ethical duties, on the right fulfillment of which his supernatural perfection and eternal destiny depend. Let me just finish this one thing here, the practice of religion. The practice of religion comprises acts of homage towards God, by which man acknowledges God's dominion over him and seeks his help in friendship. These acts of homage are of three kinds: direct acts of worship, regulation of conduct outside the sphere of moral obligation, and the regulation of conduct within the recognized sphere of moral obligation. Acts of worship. Religion demands that God be adored, thanked, propitiated, and asked for all that is needful for soul and body. It is by prayerful sacrifice that these forms of worship are carried out. Regulation of conduct. Outside the sphere of moral obligation, all religions recognize the practice of self-denial, works of piety, etc. with a view to obtaining a larger share of the divine favor or to secure more than ordinary sanctity or perfection. And within the sphere of moral obligation, God is the guardian of the moral law. That law, therefore, is to be regarded as his command. Obedience to its merits, God's favor. Disobedience to its merits, his punishment. The need for religion. Okay, so not only is it a good idea, you have to have it. You can't just operate on your own as an independent agent and expect to get anywhere, especially to heaven. And why not? Because God gave us a religion. Christ founded a church. And where do some people get the idea that they can operate as independent agents outside of the church that he gave us for our salvation? Doesn't make any sense, right? It only makes sense that if you tell somebody, okay, well, the Son of God came here and established a church, and that was for our salvation, then the alien would probably say, well, you have to belong to that. Obviously, he would want to join himself. So our newest ministry is converting the Greys and the little aliens who visit on UFOs to Earth. No, it's that anyone that if you said Christ came and founded a religion would say you have to belong to that. He didn't found it for nothing. He didn't found it for his own amusement. He founded it for our salvation. And not as a help to our salvation, but as the source of our salvation. Ultimately, he is the source, but salvation comes through the church because he gave to the church the work of salvation. See, this is where the Protestants, they rejected the point. Protestants believe that Christ, they say he really didn't found a church, that he just gave us a faith, whereas we can show from the Bible that he gave us a church. And if he gave us a church, there's no way around it. Okay, so no one can deny truthfully that the practice of some form of religion by man is universal. Whether one studies those tribes whose existence is hidden in the dim mists of history, or the so-called primitive peoples of the present day, the fact that they all practice religion must be acknowledged. Dogmas are found everywhere, at least belief in the existence of some supreme being, superior to man, caring for man, capable of helping or injuring man, and therefore to be placated, adored, and propitiated. Everywhere moral laws exist, always forbidding disrespect towards the deity or parents, and injustice toward fellow man. Everywhere the deity, God or gods, is worshipped according to minutely regulated rites. Therefore, the history of religion proves that religion is necessary to human nature and entirely natural. That is, that man by his whole nature is impelled to worship a supreme being whose existence he spontaneously recognizes. So as I was saying earlier, God put that inside of us to look for him. And that expresses itself in different ways, in different shapes and forms, and has throughout history. But it is universal. You know what they say, you've heard of the oldest profession, right? It's priest. I don't know what you were thinking. But from the beginning, man's been practicing ritual. So they needed somebody to specialize in that ritual, and that was their priest. The only valid explanation for the universality of religion is to be found in the fact that without religion, man cannot attain the complete satisfaction of the highest aspirations of his nature. He finds his intellect striving after knowledge of the whole truth in regard to his origin, nature, last ends, and the means to attain it. He finds his will seeking out what is good and true. He finds even his senses needing the satisfaction which comes from the acknowledgement of a supreme being. It is only religion that can satisfy these yearnings of the intellect and will and senses of man. It is religion which convinces the intellect that man comes from God and must go to him, and that teaches him the means to attain God as the last end. It is only in religion that man finds the goodness and truth capable of satisfying its aspirations. It is in religious worship that man's sensible nature finds its greatest satisfaction. So we shall continue next time with religion is a duty. Remember to look over the stuff that we go over.